Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you my implementation to Milestone 6 of the Minesweeper Coding Challenge. If you don't know what this challenge is about, check the link to the playlist in the description. So what we did in Milestone 6 was we added these three options, which change how many bombs there are in the game, how many rows, and how many columns there are. And if we're, for example, in expert mode, we're playing the game, and then we click this button, we stay in expert mode, but the game is reset. And we can also reset the game by clicking here, or we can reset the game to a different setting by clicking that other setting. So let me show you how that is implemented. So let's start with the game service, which is the model for the game. We have the game model, remember, from previous milestones, right? Which describe the game, which describe the status of the game, the solution of the game, etc. We did all of that in previous milestones. I haven't changed the game model at all. And the game model was stored in this variable. And I've also added a new variable called GGameSettings. And the GGameSettings holds the settings of the game. So let me show you what those settings look like. Let me add a print here. So when I refresh the browser, the game settings look like this. There is a preset, which is a string of either beginner, intermediate, or expert. And then there are the bomb counts, column counts, and row counts of that preset. So if I click on expert, the game settings are going to look like this, right? With a different bomb count, column count, and row count that are those of the expert setting. So that is the game settings. And we also have this function called set game settings and reset game. What does this function do? It receives a string for now. In the future, it'll also be able to receive custom settings, but we haven't implemented that in Milestone 6 yet. And then what it does with this string, which is either beginner, intermediate, or expert, is it expands it to an object. And it uses this map object, right? It uses this map object, which tells, which indicates what other properties to add to the object, right? The correct row count, column count, and bomb count of that particular preset. And that is how we set the game settings, very simple. And in order for the game settings and the game to be synchronized, basically in order for the game to always be the size and the bomb count of the game settings, once we change the game settings, we also want to reset the game. And reset game is the function that we already had before. And the only difference is that we reset the game based on the current game settings. So we take the row count, column count, and bomb count from the game settings, and we generate a game according to these values. So all this from here on down is what we already have. The only difference is that we take these values from the game settings. So that is our model. Now let's take a look at the components. So app is our root component. And remember, it used to have just the game component inside of it as a child. And the game component used to hold the game state. But I've moved the game state up one component to the app component. Why? Because I need access to the game state from the top bar as well. So the top bar is a new component in Milestone 6. And what that is it's just this, this light gray top bar with these three options. So when I click here, I need to have some kind of way to affect the game state, right? And that is why the game state is now at the app level and not down here at the game level. So that AppTopbar also has access to it. And the way it has access to it is through a context. So if you don't know what a context is in React, just read up on create context and use context. But basically all the context does is it says, okay, from here on down, all of these components and all of their descendants have access to these variables and functions. So And how do they have access to that? They just invoke use context on the game context, and from that moment, they can grab whatever variables they want from the context. So the game component used to have the game and setGame as a state, and now it has to just grab those state variables from the game context. And from here on down, it's the same implementation as before. So when you click on the smiley button here, what that does is it resets the game, which, as you may remember, resets the game according to the current settings. And that is why if I'm in expert mode and I reset game, I'm not changing the settings. I'm only resetting the game according to the current settings. And that's it for game. Now let's take a look at the AppTopbar component, which, like I said, is this upper thing up here. So the AppTopbar is just a simple div with game settings in it. And the reason I put this in a child component is because in the top bar, you might also want an about link or a profile link or whatever else you want in the top bar. So I put that in a child component instead of like implementing it here. And the game settings is basically these three guys. And the way that the game settings is rendered is you have this array of all the possible game settings, right? Beginner, intermediate, and expert. And for each one, you have the title or how you want it to be displayed up here. And then you map each of these possible game settings to a game setting component. And the game setting component can either be selected or not, depending on whether the game settings preset, which is the game settings state, which reflects the model, right? So remember when we clicked on each of these, the game settings changed. So we want to indicate whether this one is selected, this one is selected, or this one is selected. Let me show you, right? If expert is selected, it also has a class of selected, and any one of them, when they're selected, they have a different class. And all that class does is to add a color and a background color. That is why it looks different from the others. So the game setting has to know whether it is selected or not. And it also indicates when the setting was selected or when the setting was clicked. So let's take a look at game setting. Very simple component that either adds a selected class or not, and indicates when it was clicked and displays the title. So what happens when a game setting is clicked? Then in that case, onChange game settings is invoked with that setting ID. So basically onChange game settings, beginner or intermediate or expert, right? And what is onChange game settings? It's a function that we got from the context, which means that it was implemented up here, right, in the app, and then it's part of the context, right? And all this does is change the model, right? It sets the new game settings to beginner, intermediate, or advanced, and it resets the game according to those new game settings. And then this is just a model change, right? We don't have a state change yet. So we want to change the state. We want to change the game settings state as well as the game state. And that is why when I click here, it also not only changes the model, but also changes the game settings, right? And it also, changes the game itself, the reactive variable. And that's it. That's how I implemented Milestone 6. Let me know what you think, if you found a more elegant implementation, or if you like this implementation. I'm going to leave a link to the branch in GitHub with the code for Milestone 6 with my solution, so you're welcome to check that out as well. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments, because otherwise I am just talking to myself here. And in the next milestone, we'll probably implement custom and maybe a few other things. We'll see. So I'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching.